Now, there is this idea, you know, of Taoism. But that's something that is something I'm afraid that that is also something that was invented by the West, you know. The West have been grappling, of course, with Chinese religion from the very beginning because they find it very hard to understand. That was especially so when people came to China who wanted to convert the Chinese. That idea, you know, that the Chinese would be converted to Christianity, that's one of the oldest, I don't know if you can call it a utopia or a brain scheme, but that exists in the West. You know who started that? Marco Polo, who went to China in 1275. And you know why he went? Of course, he went there to make money. But he said to his fellow Venetians, no, he wanted to convert the emperor of China, the great Han, to Christianity, because that was an honorable and a way of looking at things. Huh? And he already, and then afterwards, of course, you had these Jesuits, you know. Father Matteo Ricci, in a typically Western way, as some kind of capital investment. The most intelligent young guys from Italy were trained to study Chinese and got lots of money, and they went via Macau and then to China. And first they disguised themselves as Buddhist monks, and then they disguised themselves as Confucian literati, and then they invented something that is called Confucianism. Why? In order to facilitate. They found among all the different scala of different philosophical and religious traditions, China is very rich. It's an enormous country with the longest unbroken cultural history in the world. So, of course, it's teeming with all kinds of forms of religious feeling and expression and so on. Eh? And one was the kind of outcast, and that was that of the poor teachers of classical Chinese. They were called the Ru, the weaklings. That's the translation of it, the Ru. And he had to learn Chinese, so he learned by them, you know. And they complained because the emperor at that time, that was Emperor Wanli of the end of the Ming, he didn't like them. He said that all that Confucian thing and morality and all that school teaching, he was fed up with that, you know. He had too much of that. He didn't want to have it. So they complained bitterly, and he took his side. They were all gay. Matteo Ricci was also gay. They loved each other. They danced with each other. They just found each other. Ricci didn't want to go back to Rome anymore. He just loved it in China. And the Chinese loved him too. They developed a great love, and so he baptized them. They thought it was very funny, you know. They had a great time together. And he brought them all kind of things, you know, prismas and field glasses and all of that. They had a wonderful time. And so he took her side. And he said, you know, the only valuable thing I found in China, of course, his experience of China was extremely limited, and his Chinese was not good either. How do we know? Because we found in the Bibliothèque Nationale of Paris, we found the manuscript of his translation of the Roman Catholic Mass. Well, I don't know how teaching of China is now, but I suppose that a graduate student in an American university would do a better job. You know, it's not very good, but it doesn't matter. He was the first one. But he said the only thing I really found valuable in whole China is this Confucian. It's one of the three teachings. So he thought together with Buddhism, that's a religion, but it's not a religion, so it's a philosophy. So he put that forward. He said, that's it. And as long as the Chinese belong to this Confucianism, they can also be Christian. They can be compatible. It can be compatible. You cannot be a Christian and a Buddhist at the same time, or you cannot be Christian and Muslim at the same time, or you cannot be Christian and Taoist at the same time. But you can be Christian and Confucian at the time. That goes well, perfectly well. So he said they don't have to change. They're wonderful. They're great guys. They have morality, they have upright, they love their parents, and so they are the best there is in religion. So he converted them, and then he let them continue to worship their ancestors and do their annual sacrifices to Confucius and so on. But when later the Dominicans came from Manila and also wanted a piece of the Christian pie in China, they were not of the same opinion. They said, that's idolatry, that's very bad, you can't do that. So they refused that. That sparked the rights controversy. And perhaps people don't know that nowadays, but that was the big, big thing. For centuries, it went up and on. There were so much arguments. The greatest philosophers of those times, first of all Spinoza, who in Amsterdam in the middle of the 17th century, when Amsterdam was seething with Chinese publications about China, images of China, Chinese ceramics, and so they were amazed. He got his idea of this kind of natural, spontaneous. He got it from, thanks to this right controversy that proclaimed and diffused this Confucian, or Chinese, as a matter of fact, cosmology and about the Tao and the great principle and yin and yang. They started families. And then, of course, Leibniz, who wrote his famous tractatus on the natural theology of the Chinese. It was so influential. So influential. And whole China during the late, whole Europe, I mean, during the whole late 17th century, early 18th century, you know, they went through you cannot imagine how big China was for them and everything. There were Chinese gardens. It changed our perception of space completely from the geometrical model of nature we inherited from the Greeks. We got the model of the spontaneous form of nature with rock gardens and little ponds and so on. The landscape garden comes also from China. And of course drinking tea. So the influence was fantastic. But it shaped the image of the West and of Chinese religion. And that was nice, of course, but it didn't correspond to Chinese reality at all. So what happened? What happened that when the West then had got all this from China and were dressing in Chinese clothes and drinking Chinese tea, which become very habit-forming, we bought all these things from China. And that was economically ruinous. China is, of course, a country full of philosophers, we all know, and full of all kinds of beautiful things. But China is also the first and greatest manufacturing and trading nation the world ever has known. China ruined the Roman Empire by the silk trade. Therefore, the Romans called China Ceres, the land of silk. That silk that traveled over the Silk Road, once it arrived in Rome, and you made garments of it, togas for the rich Roman ladies. The cost was ruinous, but they couldn't stop buying it. That happened once. The second time it happened in the 18th century. This tea trade, the place where I live, in Fuzhou, was the center of this tea trade. Look at the center of Fuzhou, the beautiful old buildings, very decrepit nowadays, but they still stand there. You know, that was the richest city of China. Fantastic. But it was ruinous. Those tea clippers, you know, those cutty sarks who brought the tea to England, and it was a ruinous trade. We bought the Chinese, but the Chinese didn't buy anything back. So that problem had to be resolved. Nowadays, we're living the same thing. We have secretaries of state and all visiting China saying, this China trade is ruining us. History has some way of repeating itself. Sure. We don't learn. We just can't learn. So what happened then? I mean, in the 18th century was very bad. That's a really black page in the history of we should never forget that. Because a certain guy called Lord Macartney in 1793, he went with a letter of King George, I don't know which King George, there's so many of them, to the Chinese throne, and he had lots of gifts for the emperor, and he said, let's establish official relations and let's try to do something, open your markets. Because he had learned from all these writings that the Chinese emperor was the most powerful potentate. He could do everything. The Chinese emperor could do everything except open trade. That was not his province. The Chinese state had nothing to say about trade. There was no Ministry of Commerce. Who was doing trade? That were the guilds and corporations of China. The so-called 公司, the commonweal trades, the 行会, they had that, and their temples, and their 社会. The word 社会, which means society in China, in Japanese, it means commercial society. 社会. It's all one. The emperor had nothing to say about it. The Chinese themselves tried very hard. When Macartney sailed from what is now Hong Kong, he sailed to Tianjin, near Beijing. He was waylaid on his way by the very powerful merchant guilds of a city called Ningbo. They stopped him. They said, don't go to Beijing, do trade with us. It's useless. You can't get anything. Macartney didn't believe it. He had read in the books that the Chinese emperor could grant everything. Like nowadays, all these businessmen, they run to government officials to do this and that. But the government officials only can think they pocket money, you know, that's the only thing they can do. They can't really help you to build your, you have to be, it's somewhere else. History repeats itself a little bit, I'm afraid. So, he couldn't. This embassy of Lord Macartney, extremely famous. The first pictures of China were made and so on. They traveled with a lot of people and wrote many reports how beautiful China was. And of course, China was far more advanced at that time than any Western country. They were amazed in what they saw. The treasures, the beauty, the wealth of China. We think of China as a poor country, but at that time it was an extremely affluent country. So they were amazed. But the embassy itself, well, was a big, how do you call it? Well, didn't work. It's a fiasco. It was a fiasco. So I don't know whether it's true or not. But according to the Chinese archives, Macartney made a secret threat. He said, if you do not open the market, he told the old Emperor Qianlong, we will import opium. Because opium and opium smoking, which was invented by my ancestors, the Dutch, to subdue the Javanese and to make them tame, to mix opium with tobacco and then smoke it. It had been found that the Chinese also liked it. Opium was forbidden in China, except for medical purposes. And the emperor believed that as he had signed as a young man an edict in the early 18th century forbidding opium, that laws stood. Well, it didn't. Like the laws against abusive substances in the United States. You can edict as many laws as you want. People will just do it. It's the same in China. But the big difference is that instead of having a Mexican border, China had a sea border of thousands of kilometers long of all kinds of creeks, which was completely indefensible. Moreover, China didn't have any customs, not any army or anything to do. China was completely open. So the English, I'm getting a bit far from religion now, but I mean, it's part of the story. I mean, they consciously and with lots of money built opium plantations in northern India, and then, of course, as subjects of His Majesty, the King of England, they didn't sell it directly. They sold it to country traders who then smuggled it on the coast. And you just look at the figures. The opium addiction doubled every year from the end of the 18th century, all through the 19th century, until 1907. Finally, the Western powers, who became filthy rich by this opium trade. Perhaps we should return the money? Huh? They're filthy rich by this opium trade. They finally signed an agreement in Lausanne saying that they would stop smuggling opium into China. Okay, that's a long story. But it has something to do with what I want to say. That is that there was a misunderstanding about what China was about and how Chinese society was. And when the West became more and more powerful and interfered more in China, and the idea of this Confucian China was taken over by not any longer the Catholic missionaries, but then by the Protestant missionaries, who at the end of the First Opium War in 1842 were allowed now officially to operate in China and even got immunity and official rank as Chinese officials. Yes, sir. They took over that idea, and they started to work with all their money and all their power to make China similar to the image they had. China had to become as they wanted it. That's what you see here, the university. That's how we wanted China to be. So that's it. But in fact, has it really changed?